We need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is Buffalo What's Next. I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
I'm Dave Debo.
And I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
After May 14th, how can we afford not to talk about race?
About education, about segregation, about humanity.
Since the dawn of this nation, racial violence has existed.
The way we have designed our society has a big hand in what occurred in that Tops Market.
The suburban area, everywhere. We must work and teach our children.
We need to make sure that we put more funding in our programs that help prevent gun violence and more money into art.
If we're going to have some real healing, we've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truths.
And good morning. Welcome to Buffalo What's Next. Interesting that that particular soundbite ends on healing and talks about healing. That's going to be the topic of our discussion coming up here in the first half of Buffalo What's Next. I want to tell you about what's coming up in part two. Dave Debo is going to talk with Kevin Gaughan, activist and local attorney, putting together a food equity conference in October to talk about many of the issues that we've seen in Buffalo's east side here most certainly have been exposed and highlighted in the last 4 months. But right now we want to talk about the healing that has been going on that probably needs to continue to go on in the Buffalo's east side. And with us, Kelly Whitfield, the founder of Healing Hub of New York and executive director. Well, Kelly, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, Kelly, we've heard different people talk about the healing and how important it is for the community. But can you, as best you can, because I know you've spent a lot of time on the ground in and around that neighborhood, what is the state right now? Can you sum it up as you understand from people that you've talked to? What's the emotional state right now of that neighborhood?
So the Healing Hub does 4 food giveaways, and 2 of our food giveaways are in that neighborhood a week. One on Main and Utica and one on Jefferson. And what we do is we sit and we actively listen to the people that come to our food giveaways. The mental state in that community is kind of a frozen state, kind of survivor mode, right? Fight or flight, right? Some of our clients that actually were in the shooting, right, were in Tops, feel like they haven't even processed or healed from the unaddressed trauma before that happened in that community, right? And now they're trying to figure out what their next step is and in this healing process, right? Where do they feel safe? Where do they feel safe to come to talk about kind of how they feel, what's going on, confusement too.
You know, it is interesting. We've talked to other groups, including Best Self, who
Yes.
They've really done remarkable work in outreach.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting how much that is needed, that the emotional support, the mental health support.
Yeah.
That's something that, is, like I said, it's come to light for me regarding that neighborhood in the last few months, but it seems that it's something that doesn't get talked about enough.
No.
Would you agree?
I definitely agree. There's a stigma, right, to talk about mental health, right? There's a stigma. Our society gives a stigma, and independent families, right, kind of condition the children that what goes in the house stays in the house, especially in the Black community. There's a distrust, right? Because if we talk about what's going on in our families, someone might come and take our kids. Right? Something bad might happen, a consequence might happen if we talk about what's going on in our homes. So we stay sick, we stay stuck, we stay broken, right? So there's definitely a stigma, and that causes one of the biggest barriers, that and the fear of being judged, right? So I know that it kept me out there, and I know from talking with people out there that that's what keeps them out there as well.
Your backstory is very compelling, and I do want to touch upon it because I think it'll be instructive to this conversation, but I don't want to focus on that just yet. I want to stay with Healing Hub and what you're trying to accomplish here. You say you're out there, you're giving out, you have food giveaways. That's obviously a great way to bring people in. What about when they do come to you? Can you talk about that interaction? And obviously you don't want to be over the top, tell me your problems, but yet you're most certainly hearing some really inner thoughts from people.
So the Healing Hub's mission is we create a safe space for anyone to heal from unaddressed trauma, right? We create that safe space by creating a judgment-free space, right? And by doing that, we have a lot of the people that are out there, boots on the ground. These people have been through the fire themselves, which makes it more welcoming for people to share their truths, right? So like a peer healing, right? So when people come up to our tables, first of all, we give lunches out that already have writing on them. I see you. You're heard. You're amazing. You're special. Because on Maine and Utica, you've got like a triangle of trauma, right? You've got your methadone clinic right there. You've got there's a VA clinic there, and you've got a mental health clinic there, right? And there's a lot of drug activity. There's some prostitution. There's a lot of overdosing that's going on over there. And, people don't feel seen, they don't feel heard, and they definitely don't feel loved, right? So when they come into this welcoming, loving space, wherever we go, we offer it in a hub as well. But wherever they go, this is the kind of space that we create. People seem to just come and drop their truth, right? It's amazing. It's miraculous, right? And when they drop their truth, that's when they can start healing from their truth, right? And that's when we can provide services. If we can't provide a service someone needs to empower them to take that next step to healing, we're going to find someone that can. So we don't just bring food to these food giveaways. We bring clothes. We bring hygiene products. Anything our community needs, we're going to find it and we're going to bring it. For an example, we serve the homeless community on Saturdays, right? There's a lot of recovery and addiction, a lot of brokenness, a lot of trauma down there. So when we go down there, like blankets are needed and things like that. I was just there last Saturday, and a woman who has been homeless for 20 years has finally found housing, right? And she's like super excited. And so this is what we do. Right. This is just what we do. It's nothing's too big, nothing's too small. We're going to find a way to help service our community.
Without breaking confidence too much, can you generalize about some of the things that you hear?
Well, it's interesting because I hear different things at different locations, right? So with the homeless community, I hear a lot of the people in the homeless community want to stay out there because they don't want to be in a judgmental society. They just don't. They would rather stay homeless than to do that, right? They would rather stay homeless and they have built their own community within each other where they trust each other, right? And they're kind of their own family. So we hear a lot of that downtown on Saturdays. On Fridays, just a lot of... people are looking for a lot of hope to stop using. It's riddled with addiction on Maine and Utica, right? So just a lot of hope to stop using. They feel like they've been forgotten about on Jefferson, okay? A lot of survivors from the mass shooting feel like once the cameras have left and all the big organizations have left out the way, they feel like they're vulnerable, left out there, and they don't even know what to do. I have one client, and she says it all the time. She's like, I don't care about compensation. I don't care about anything. Who's going to help my mental health for years? Who's going to be there so I don't bleed on my children? I can't even leave my house to go to work. And if I can't work, I don't have money. If I don't have money, I'm homeless. And she talks about this is not even the trauma she's had to deal with for the 30 years she's already been living, right? So it's now become layers and layers and layers of trauma, like an onion, right? Just layers and layers. So
it's interesting to hear those types of stories. Your group is basically you're volunteers.
We volunteer, yes.
And these are counselors,
yes,
teachers, artists.
That's right.
Talk about how they go about their business.
Oh, it's amazing. So we do have counselors on the board that actually have private practices, but they know the urgency, and they know that a lot of our clients, a lot of our community don't even have insurance, right? So how are we going to provide them with the mental health healing that they need, right? We have to do a grassroots type of thing. Even before, like the mass shooting, we offered a safe haven, like you talked about, through art, through music, through doulas, because racism is obviously trauma, right? And we know that, women are 3 times more likely to die giving childbirth being a Black woman, right, than a white woman. So we do have Black women doulas who are women's voices, right? We have writing workshops and how to command your morning workshops. And then, we have, restorative healing circles that we offer. So we all know that we didn't get traumatized the same. We're not going to heal the same. So that's why we offer that variety. And our board is made up of a variety of people as well, right? And all the healers. So we have a board and we have the healers, and then we have coordinators, and we have the food drive coordinators as well. So it's a lot of pieces, moving pieces to the organization. But the board members are very passionate about the healing that needs to be seen in the community. We have one board member, and I can say her name, Felicia Stanley. She's amazing. She's a therapist. She worked for Best Self. She was boots on the ground there, offering free counseling. Felicia is amazing. She has her own organization, No Wound Untreated, and we're collaborating those 2 organizations because we're so parallel. But she was there Monday through Sunday on Jefferson. Right, or at the Resource Council every day, plus her job, plus her paying job. So our board's made up of people like that.
We're talking with Kelly Whitfield. She is the founder and executive director of Healing Hub, and we've got a lot to talk about here. That is for sure. We're glad to have you with us on Buffalo What's Next. I appreciate you sharing with me what you are hearing and doing a good job of not breaking confidence. What about success stories? Because like you said, everybody heals at a different pace, a different time frame. What about successes that you've seen? What can you share?
We have so many success stories, and we blast them all over social media.
So go on. There we go. Come on.
Like I said,
the radio.
We just have one of our clients in downtown finding housing after 20 years.
That's great.
Just from being empowered, right? Like we had a teenager who was transitioning, right, from female to male, and being bullied and things like that, and found their power through music and private guitar lessons, right? We had, and now this teenager is able to use their voice, right? We've had people who have been survivors of the mass shooting who have been homeless because of that trauma now have housing, right? We have people who have healed from art or healed through art, so empowered that now they're teaching workshops to other people. They're teaching art workshops to other people, right? We've serviced about 19,000 people just through the food giveaways, right? So now, even through like the workshops and things like that, we have definitely empowered a number of clients to start their healing journey, whether it be going into a facility, right, to start, or whether it be housing, or whether it be going to counseling, and staying in counseling. It's a lot. People have been clothed, fed. It's just miraculous to see. It really is. And cycles have been broken.
Let's talk about cycles a little bit, because you touched on something. You said it before we were on the air, and I want to try to get back to it because it was such a fascinating perspective. I've had people sit in the very chair that you're, Black professionals, people with advanced degrees, talking about the stress of being Black in America on a daily basis. But you brought up something about unchecked trauma that is getting passed on from generation to generation. That's right. Expand on that, please.
That's right. So you've got generational trauma, but you've got generational trauma that kind of stays in your cells, right? Trauma stays in our cells, and it's passed on. So I kind of it's passed on, and we talked about environmental, and it's also passed on through just birth, right? I talked about a white grandma, right? and a black grandma. Somebody's white grandmother was watching lynchings, eating popcorn, right? Somebody's black grandma was getting raped by 5 police officers, right? And passing that trauma down onto her family. So it's like it's really, it's passed on. We don't talk about that trauma that's held in ourselves, right? We don't talk about that trauma that kind of has us living fight or flight and survivor mode on a daily basis. And then after we're born, the traumas that are poured on after that, right? So it's just layers of trauma that we don't address. And if you don't address this trauma as a child, it's going to manifest into something different as an adult, and it's going to be really, it's really difficult. It's really difficult. It's really difficult to find and to heal and to understand your triggers and trauma and things like that. So we need to talk about it more. And we talked about that it's not spoken about because of the stigma.
And also the idea that it's almost become ingrained to a certain extent, culturally ingrained inside Black Americans
It is.
to just that
Push
we
it down.
We can't talk about it.
Yeah. One of the things that are passed through is our resilience, right?
Which,
all the way
which
from
is
slavery.
which is of course something to be hailed for sure.
That's right. That's right. But we shouldn't have to. We shouldn't have to be so resilient. Do you know what I mean? That's it. That's the whole problem, right? We should have a fair chance, right? Because we're already born into trauma. I was born into trauma. It's just like a setup, and then everybody's kind of expected to learn the same in school and then be these successful people. It's really hard to be successful when you're living every day in fight or flight. When you're living every day in survivor mode, you don't plan for a future. You just plan to get through the next day. It's different, right? It is.
Kelly Whitfield with us this morning on Buffalo What's Next. You're kind enough to share some of your personal story before, and you most certainly have been gracious enough to discuss it to a certain extent, and I'll let you go as far as you want to go. But it's interesting how you grew up in a rural community where, you were subjected to racial slurs that you didn't even really understand were racial slurs.
That's right.
That's an amazing reality.
I was conditioned not to make waves. So I'll back up. I was brought up in Fredonia. So Fredonia is a rural white community. But I was adopted by 2 pedophiles who have adopted and fostered other Black and brown children and abused them. I just happened to be the one that was kind of conditioned, right? Because if I was this perfect little girl, then nobody would think what they were doing on the inside of the house is what they were doing, right? So I was kind of like, I was conditioned to always smile, right? To be resilient, right? To smile, to be polite, to always have manners. I was put in a different dress every day, and I was put through everything you can think of, whether it be Girl Scouts, swimming. Everybody else in the house didn't get the same treatment. They were beaten, used as slaves. My little brother, who was adopted, he was beaten like every day, right? I got that treatment because they needed somebody. They needed a scapegoat, right? So,
and you excelled. You excelled in school.
Well, it's interesting because I did. I was a good student. I was a flute player. I was a county champion swimmer. But people don't know how broken I was on the inside. People don't know that in middle school I was putting guns in my mouth. People don't know in high school I was bulimic. Right? I just needed something to cope with what I didn't understand. I hated myself. For someone who smiled so much and was so happy, I hated my insides. I didn't understand why I was so broken. And I went through life like that, right? Because I just didn't have any understanding. And because I didn't understand, I had no gut. I had no boundaries. And my body was used to being in abuse. So when I tell you our cells remember, they do. My brain didn't remember the details of the sexual abuse, but my body never forgot. So if a man came up behind me, when I jumped, that's a trigger, right? And not understanding why I have this anxiety, why I have these thoughts in my head, why I have flashbacks, why am I so fight or flight, right? So when I found my escape through swimming, and I became really good at it, and I was so good at it, and it was going to take me out of that environment. I was so excited. I was really controlled by the people who adopted me, so there was only certain places I could go to college, but I was going to go as far away as I could, and that was Iona. I got a full swimming scholarship to Iona. I couldn't wait. The summer before going to Iona, a car hit me going 70 miles per hour. I was going 55 head on. I used to work at Chautauqua Institute at an art gallery. And I looked down, and both my femurs were cracked. And this part of my leg was in this seat, and this part of my leg was up here on the door, and my ankle was underneath the car floor, and my tibias were crushed. My stomach was ripped open. My nose was ripped off my face. My lung was collapsed. And I was awake for the whole thing. The steering wheel had taken the engine was in my lap. And I was mercy flown to ECMC by the Buffalo Bills helicopter who practiced in Fredonia at the time. This was 1996. And I thought that I was paralyzed. So I remember saying to the witness, who happened to be a priest, he came to the window and I was swearing at him. I'm like, leave me on the side of the road because I can't feel my legs. These legs were going to take me away, right? And I can't feel them. I said, leave me on the side of the road. I said some swear words, but I apologize later. But I was mercy flown to ECMC. And I remember I was an athlete. I never did a drug. I wouldn't even take aspirin. I remember in 8th grade, Mr. Tate said aspirin was going to cause stomach bleeds. Wouldn't even take an aspirin, right? So the first drug they give me, I'm in intensive care, life support, ECMC. They're putting me all together. I have rods in my legs now, bolts in my hips, pins in my tibias, plates in my ankles. So they're putting me back together, 55 staples, all that good jazz. And they give me the morphine drip. And I have all this unaddressed trauma. And now I've got a morphine drip, And I say, because I used to speak in the rooms at NA, Narcotics Anonymous, I say all the time, like, I overdosed the first time I used. That qualifies me to sit here, because I kept pushing the button, and my machine wasn't set up, so I overdosed. They had to use the paddles to bring me back, right? But what I remember is the feeling of that drug, and remembering it's taking me away from all my problems. Like, it's helping me cope emotionally, and from there, an addict was born, for sure. So, and the doctors were prescribing me this medication. So I had no understanding. I never even seen a street drug before this, right? So I had no understanding what addiction was. No one told me about trauma. Everybody knew I had trauma, but nobody's talking about it because we don't talk about it. You be happy and you smile. You be grateful, right? So an addict was born, and I went from there I tried to take my degree. I went to college in a wheelchair. Learned how to walk again. Well, because the abuser took my credits, and again, I have to be perfect. So I went to college that fall in an electric wheelchair. And I learned how to walk and everything again. And I got with an abusive guy, and he used to beat me and things like that. But again, I didn't understand because that's all I knew was abuse. Even though I didn't get physically abused, abuse is all my body knows. Right? It doesn't know any different. I don't have red flags. I don't have a gut, right? So people have violated my boundaries. I don't know any different, right? So I take him down south. I go to North Carolina and take him down south with me, and I get pregnant down there, and he puts me in a bathtub and beats that baby out of me because a guy looked at me. I was teaching 4th grade, and I had a stillborn in a really, really, really racist hospital. So I got to experience that, where they do think Black women can handle more pain. They do. They left me on the floor bleeding and screaming while they were taking other people back there. And I was like, 21, 22, scared, right? I was losing my baby Jordan. And they finally took me back. They told me to stop screaming, that I was bothering the other patients. They told me to be quiet, right? And then after I passed my child, they threw him in a garbage can. I didn't know my rights. I didn't have a voice. I was getting submerged under trauma. So what do? Use more, right? Because that's how, now I'm starting to learn that's how I'm going to cope, is I'm going to use drugs. And when I went to my first rehab for that in Jamestown, I came back up north. I realized I'm not manageable. I'm only on pain pills. When I went up to my first rehab in Jamestown and nobody talked about trauma, we're only talking about drugs, and you put a bunch of broken people in one room, that's not productive, right? Because we're going to talk. We're going to talk about all our brokenness and how drugs are helping us. And because I don't know about addiction, I don't understand what's going on, I don't understand I'm using drugs to cope with my feelings, I'm going to compare myself right out of this rehab. I'm nothing like any of you. And I left with a guy who smoked crack. And it's my favorite line. I went from being a teacher, in the classroom to a student in the crack house overnight. Literally. Never saw a street drug and was introduced crack. And because I just wanted to cope with how I was feeling, I was doing it. So for years, for maybe 2 to 3 years, I was trying to kill myself with drugs. I was doing about 70 Lortabs, two 8 balls of crack, heroin on top of the same pipe. I was literally trying to kill myself. I wasn't using to have fun. Now I lost everything. I lost my teaching job. I lost my identity as a swimmer. I lost my identity as a person. I lost my child. I lost everything. There was no reason for me to live. And I'm broken. I hate myself anyways. I'm broken. So I stayed out there. And what kept me out there is the fear of being judged, right? I didn't feel safe enough to talk about anything that I was feeling or going through.
Kelly Whitfield, we're coming up to our final minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to give the condensed version of your recovery.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to just leave it right there. Other than to say that you were able to
go
drug-free.
Oh, yeah. For years. I have a beautiful family now, right? I got pregnant with Cameron. He's my 17-year-old son. And that's what gave me purpose.
And Healing Hub.
And the Healing Hub. So even after I put the drug down, it didn't mean that I was healed. It wasn't until I got my memory back, got empowered, confronted my abusers. And that's when I started the Healing Hub, because I realized I'm not alone. There are more people out there, right?
And when it comes to Healing Hub, what's next for you and for this community?
What's next is we had a building in Amherst. It's a 5,000 square foot building. It was right next door to a methadone clinic. We're trying to move into a building on Main Street to be able to provide all this wonderful healing right in the heart of where it needs to be, right? Right in the community that we serve with our food giveaways, community that we sit with every day. So that's what's next. We're trying to do that. And once we get this building, we'll be able to provide, and other organizations can come in this building. It'll be like a hub, like a hub for healing, right? And we'll work together with other organizations to provide what the community needs, what the community deserves.
You may have taken the answer to that question right out, but this is a Dave Debo, my partner here on this show, asked this question: what does the community need?
The community needs healing. Period. Because I don't care how many degrees you have or how awesome you are. It's really hard to live life if you have unaddressed trauma.
There's a lot of unaddressed trauma out there. Of course, some of it lingering from May 14th. Others, as we've talked about, generational. Do you have hope?
I have so much hope. Oh, my gosh. If you see me out there, you'll see me running around dancing. Everybody knows I dance when I walk, because if I can heal, if somebody like me can heal, I was broken for 40 years. If I can heal, anybody can heal. I guarantee it, anybody can heal.
How can somebody help out Healing Hub? Is there a way?
Yes, we are always taking volunteers for definitely our food giveaways, people to lead different workshops in areas. Come visit our website at www.healinghubny.org, or you can call 716-697-4744 if you have any questions, or email us at healinghubny@gmail.com.
and I can assure you, Kelly, if everybody who's listening is like me, we've got a lot of questions, but we only have so much time to get to it. Kelly Whitfield of Healing Hub, thanks very much for being with us on Buffalo What's Next.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed myself.
Coming up next, Dave Debo talks with Kevin Gaughan. This is Buffalo What's Next.
Donations come in many forms: a sustaining membership, a one-time gift, even that extra vehicle you no longer need. Learn more about the advantages of donating a vehicle. Here's how. Go to WNED.org/vehicles.
Watch the WNED PBS original production, If Our Water Could Talk.
Buffalo would not be here if it weren't for the water.
Our water defined our history, and it will define our future.
Everybody's got a new hope for Buffalo, and it's all about water.
If Our Water Could Talk, now streaming on YouTube and the PBS video app.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter @WBFO or email us at news@WBFO.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
This is Buffalo What's Next. Good morning. I'm Dave Debo. And with me for the next half hour here is Kevin Gaughan, civic activist, attorney. You might remember him from his efforts to try to have regionalized government, a big conference at Chautauqua Institution all those years ago. He has another big conference coming up, and one that is especially relevant to the discussion here after the shootings on May 14th. We're going to talk a little bit about food inequity today, and a big conference that Kevin has, bringing in some national experts to try and really change the conversation here. Kevin, thanks for coming by.
It's an honor to be here with you, David. Thank you.
Quite a list of participants. I mean, this isn't just a few community members who say, yeah, we have a food desert.
Well, first and foremost, and as you say, in the aftermath of the brutal, inhumane, and racist attack that took place in East Buffalo at the beginning of the summer, like every Buffalonian and indeed every American, in my grief, I was acquainted with two of the victims, as so many of us here in Buffalo were, and I couldn't get out of my head, the irretrievable loss of all those dreams, and of course the enormous discussion about food inequity and the fact that there was just one supermarket on the east side in our city. And I was struck by that. And I remember thinking to myself, if the High Court of History looked back on the tragedy and the immense discussion and reawakening and refocus of us and the nation on food justice, and we did nothing, I think we would have been judged harshly. So I thought some good should emerge from this unspeakable sorrow. I did some research about food inequity. Of course, we all sort of knew about it a little bit, but I did not know the extent. And here's what I learned. Almost 30 million Americans live with little or no access to fresh food and vegetables. And, of course, that speaks to health and nutrition. And when you say 30 million Americans, that's children. And of course, in the context in which we work here in Buffalo is, as we all know, and this program has highlighted so wonderfully, we're the fourth most impoverished city in America, and we're among the most segregated cities in America. So this large population, more than 75,000 in East Buffalo, with just one supermarket, and then just over the urban boundary in Cheektowaga, there's about the same amount of people with 10 supermarkets.
You've done the math, I'm certain, haven't you?
By that you mean?
Looking at how many supermarkets there are in Cheektowaga compared to the amount in Buffalo.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
And then, as you kindly referred to, I did what I've always done in these small, modest efforts, something my father taught me, which is you have to truly understand something. You have to find those folks who have devoted their lives to it. So I spent most of June and part of July traveling the country, and of course I found an immense amount of scholars, experts, educators, and most important, practitioners, folks who have devoted their lives to this issue, because here's the three things I've learned. First and foremost, food inequity and food injustice in America existed long before the tragedy here in Buffalo. Secondly, those black citizens and leaders here in East Buffalo have strived mightily for years to find solutions to this problem, and they've made great progress. Third, I learned all they need is resources. So the idea I got was, what if we could get in one room those great black leaders in our city, in the East Side who understand this issue most deeply, and those with women and men with the resources to perhaps make not one-off, not a temporary investment, but long-term sustainable investments to get to the bottom of this issue.
And in that regard, this is an interesting project. You have about 13 different people coming in for the summit, at least 13 guests that are confirmed and several others that you've invited. And it's a conference of national stature. When the shootings happened, I think people said racism is not a Buffalo problem, but it's a problem in Buffalo. Similarly, food inequity is not necessarily a Buffalo problem, but certainly a problem in Buffalo. You're looking at it kind of from a national perspective.
Yes, sir. And what I've learned, again, from these black voices, and by the way, as you mentioned, this conference is going to be led by black and brown voices.
Including you have the president of Morehouse College. David Thomas is one of your co-chairs.
The Morehouse College, one of our nation's most historically significant black colleges. And I came across him because in the aftermath of the Buffalo shooting, he wrote these beautiful and very poignant blog posts about not only gun violence and minority communities, but food equity as well. And then we also have, and we're honored to have, Rita Hubbard Robinson, who's perhaps Buffalo's leading voice in food access. So they're going to be in charge of the discussion. And as you say, what I'm really trying to do is find as many folks, both with the resources, investors, finance people, banks, and other national experts, and get them in the room so that they can see what Buffalo has done already. In effect, what this conference is attempting to do is it's time now for this nation to address this inequity. And by the way, of course, food inequity is just sort of a portal to the massive disinvestment that took place in communities like East Buffalo. Just looking at the WBFO survey that you did months ago, and one of your fine reporters, Mr. O'Neill White, we all learned again dramatically about these attitudes that resulted. We all can remember the shameful practice of banks and institutions making some maps that said invest here but don't invest there. And of course, so food inequity is an outcome of that. So it just seems to me that now that more and more people like myself are recognizing that food access, it's a civil right, it's a human right, and it's now time to redress it. And I thought, what if Buffalo led the way?
And I've noticed, too, the Philadelphia story is really more than a movie with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. There are a lot of initiatives in Philadelphia that you're bringing here to talk about. Tell me about the Philadelphia story and what we might be able to possibly learn from them.
Right. So the way we're going to try to structure our conference is, first we'll have some national presenters, and that will include, I found this magnificent entity, this called the Food Trust in Philadelphia, which also has a severe problem in this regard. And they're going to be represented, and they're going to come and sort of give the national perspective. In addition, of course, I was surprised and pleased to learn there's also financial entities that have been formed in the country over these past decades to raise funds and capital to create new sort of business models. Again, this is a very complex issue and problem. And speaking to the ones who understand it the most, people like Alexander Wright, who founded our African Heritage Food Co-op, and Allison DeHoney.
Who is trying to do a Grow Green project over there.
That's right, yeah. Right. The CEO of Fruits and Veggies, and Rebecca Williams, and of course Rita. The answer is not just supermarkets. The answer, of course, is also local grocery stores, farms, hydroponics. In other words, there's several components that have to be placed in a community, in a neighborhood in which that type of investment heretofore hasn't happened, which is just so shameful. So again, I'm hoping that in addition to these national presenters, we'll also have someone from the Reinvestment Fund in Philadelphia, again, which is an entity that raises funds and capital to assist people like Allison and Alex. And then, of course, I had to talk my way into these financial institutions, and I take a measure of pride in doing it on behalf of my community. So Bank of America, Ted Janicki, who's president of Bank of America here in Buffalo. He's going to be there. An acquaintance, a longtime acquaintance of mine, John Thornton, who's former president of Goldman Sachs, perhaps our nation's most prestigious investment bank, and also chairman emeritus of the Brookings Institution, which is one of the most progressive think tanks in America. He's going to be there as well.
You also have on the agenda, and this is interesting to me, you have John Persons from TOPS. If this effort is successful, TOPS could have some competition here, and yet he's still coming to the table to talk about these food equity issues.
I didn't know John before undertaking this initiative, and when you do something like this, among the great gifts that are bestowed on you are meeting fascinating people and interesting people, and I called John, who again I didn't know, and that wonderful man called right back straight away. And of course we all saw the leadership that he demonstrated in the aftermath of sort of navigating the TOPS matter and the difficult choices that had to be made. But yes, in addition, I felt the final component of the composition of this conference should be supermarket executives. So we've actually invited the the CEOs of the 6 largest supermarket executives in America, and John was the first to say yes. And because I think he understands, like all businessmen, number one, competition's good. Number two, and perhaps much more important, is that this problem is no longer something that America should be burdened with, and these black and brown and minority people. It's a matter of inequity, and it has to be redressed.
What do you picture happening as a result of this conference? Nice speakers, Kevin. Okay, thank you very much, and then everybody disperses. Not necessarily the plan.
Having founded conferences before, I've learned some lessons over the years about proper follow-up. This is a one-day conference, but its purpose is to give rise to a comprehensive follow-up report.
You want a plan.
Yes, sir. I should say, more important, these wonderful people, again, in East Buffalo, these black leaders who have been working so hard, they already have a plan. And they're going to be able now, for perhaps the first time, to show it again with people with the resources. So my idea is that the conference will. Another thing that I learned, of course, is there's a broad array of views on what the solution is to this problem. They will all be represented at this conference, which, by the way, is taking place on Wednesday, October 12th, here in Buffalo. The wonderful developer Douglas Jamal has kindly donated space for us to meet in. My view is that we synthesize and report to the country afterward a comprehensive report of what Buffalo is doing and offering as a model, because we're getting closer to resolving this. A lot of work and a lot of investment has to take place. But again, to offer Buffalo as a model of what the nation can do and other cities can do, because, as you say, this is not a Buffalo problem.
Sure.
It's an American one.
And you spoke a little bit earlier about how you'd like to see change. And obviously there's some inequity here. I don't want to get ahead of the conference, but I want to talk with you specifically about that inequity. It's good if we have a plan to place another supermarket or to help out Alexander Wright or Allison Mahoney. All of that's great and good. But what are your thoughts on ways, and I'm talking more broadly than the conference, what are your thoughts on ways to tackle the inequity? How do we combat racism? And by the way, we only have 15 minutes left.
David, of course, that's the question.
That's huge.
That's the question of the day, and I should say of the age. And first and foremost, I think we're all grateful for and excited by the fact that we live in a time now where these difficult questions are, perhaps for the first time in our country, in our nation's history, being directly addressed. And at times it does take tragedy, unfortunately, and whether it be George Floyd or the TOPS supermarket to compel we frail human beings to do what's right. And I think your question's excellent because it reminds me, again, one of the initial lessons that I learned, which is in East Buffalo, the injustice with respect to food, access to healthy food, to understanding what food, the role it plays in your health and your upbringing and the like. which has never really happened there, and you see it in higher disease rates, diabetes, and the like, and but it's only a portal in this other broad range of lack of access in our minority communities, including East Buffalo, lack of access to education, transportation, east side of Buffalo. Dr. Samina Raja, who is perhaps one of Western New York's leading researchers and scholars on this, she believes that food is infrastructure, and it's a basic infrastructure that's lacking in these disinvested communities such as Western New York. So to attempt to begin to answer your question, I think in some small way, the way to address it is to do what we're trying to do with the conference, which is begin the conversation on a specific component of inequity. This happens to be food access. Fully and comprehensively understand it and educate it, highlight and bring attention to those folks who understand it in the most deep way through their own experience, and then do what takes place in every suburb, in every majority community. It's a harsh reality, but it's true, and that is have investment. Have the bankers say yes. And as Alexandra will tell you, the business models now, there's more than 75,000 people in that community. And there is capital there. It may not be as equal to some of our surrounding suburbs, but it's there, and there's business models that can work. And we're going to highlight those at the conference.
Kevin Gaughan is here. He's the convener of a national conference on food inequity coming to Buffalo on October 12th, including experts from across the country and people certainly in the community who can talk a little bit about this issue. That's interesting that you say, too, that maybe perhaps the way to address inequity is to address food inequity, or possibly have another summit of some sort to address inequity by addressing education inequity. I've talked with Dr. Tim Murphy at UB, head of their Health Equity Institute, about health disparities. And that's in a large part the approach they're taking. Instead of saying, hey, let's just convene a big talk where everyone says racism is bad, let's pick the specific initiatives where there might be an ability to make some progress. You chose food. Why?
Well, first and foremost, again, because of the broad and large discussion to which the mass shooting gave rise, because it just by happenstance happened at a supermarket. In large measure, those 10 people who lost their lives for the simple reason that they were in search of fresh food, because Tops was one of the sole ones. But I think you again you make a good point, which is broad discussions really. We've had a great deal of them, and you have to have the right people with the right experience and the right insight, and of course the right expertise. Our co-chairman Rita Robinson, I think she puts it very well. She says really what this is about, food inequity and health and nutrition is, along with these addressing the other inequities, is creating wealth. There's a path that we all have to travel in the course of creating wealth, which is doesn't come out of anywhere. It comes out of the ability to borrow and have access to capital. And that's another huge inequity born of the attitudes that were discussed in your WBFO, I should say revealed in your WBFO survey of several months ago, that still in America, unfortunately, rather sadly, there are attitudes that are reflected in policies. And it was interesting in the initial stages of crafting the conference. I came across a magnificent woman named Caroline Harries, who's Associate Program Director at
I was just looking at that on the agenda here, the idea that there is a group out there called the Food Trust. They are the ones with capital that help these kind of efforts get off the ground.
Yeah, well, they're actually more the the research and understanding. And the reinvestment fund is the but they're both.
All right,
in Philadelphia.
I see that one here,
right.
exactly. The reinvestment fund in Philadelphia and the Food Trust both in Philadelphia.
And in an early discussion with her, I said, I was trying to research food deserts, and she stopped me and she said, "Kevin, please don't use that phrase."
I
She
know
said,
what you're going to
"That's-
say. I've heard it on this program.
Yeah, right,
Go ahead.
Right. She said, "I feel that phrase suggests that these inequities resulted by nature on their own, but they didn't. They were our result of specific practices, public and private policies that we now know were wrong, and that's why she prefers the phrase grocery gap."
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to go for one that I've heard Alexander Wright use. I've heard Alison Mahoney use. They call it outright food apartheid.
Sometimes words have to convey what my friend Rita Robinson calls as truth telling, and that phrase certainly does that.
And it's interesting too. In order to pull a conference like this together, you kind of have to thread the needle. You can't necessarily be out there screaming and yelling and confrontational, or perhaps a John Parsons from Tops wouldn't appear there. That's an interesting trick for you.
I've learned over the years, well, first and foremost, in this instance, my role is simply as an ally. My task is to facilitate these relationships between our Buffalo Black leaders, again, who are on the ground making these changes, and the folks with the resources who are kind enough to come here and listen to them, knowing that they're going to be asked for resources. And you're right. It's convening is first of all, it's a privilege, and it's an honor, and I'm grateful to God for whispering this idea to me. But there's a reason why people get together, whether it be over a dinner table, at a meeting at the office, or in a conference, and that's because the open and inclusive exchange of ideas, even concerning what has theretofore appeared as an intractable problem, can be solved. And this is a man-made problem, and as a result, it can be solved by man. And that's
I was going to ask you that. That was going to be my next question. You think this can be solved?
Well, more important, again, people like Rita and Allison and Alex, they will tell you absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Part of the reason I ask it, and forgive me for looking a little bit at the record, you convened a conference in '97 at Chautauqua on regionalism. Incredibly well received, but there are still 6 separate school districts in Cheektowaga. There is still an Erie County government and all those suburbs. A couple years back, I know your cause was the idea of downsizing the boards of some of these suburban governments. And a few of them tried it. A couple of those who did said this is not working for us, and added people back to a larger original-sized board. I'm not putting that blame at your feet, but I think it's worth noting that sometimes these things work and sometimes they don't.
Absolutely, and I'm grateful for the question.
And yet Rita says it's solvable.
We'll take it one at a time, and you're kind enough to make reference to past efforts. First and foremost, the regionalism and regional local government reform effort that myself and others undertook, that took place at a time when there was absolutely no collaboration, let alone communication among our 25 cities.
The idea was not
villages.
part of the discussion until that conference. Correct.
And as a result, for the first time, David, I take a measure of pride. Our 25 cities and 16 villages, and I should say 25 towns, 16 villages, and 3 cities in the county. We have 45 governments here. Since that conference, they for the first time started collaborating in purchasing, in service delivery. The millions of dollars in property tax savings that we've reaped as a result, I think we take a measure of pride. Secondly, of course, the research that I did about a decade ago that showed that we have the largest concentration not only of governments but politicians, and the downsizing effort. That took place, in the 4th decade of our community, and all the resources, by the way, that those suburban politicians were drawing from the inner city. That's why I did it. That's what I was attempting to shine a light on in terms of the inequity of urban-suburban division, and I look upon that as a partial success as well, because it took place at a time when most Western New Yorkers, you recall, David, when we all thought nothing can change. Nothing can ever change here. The waterfront lays fallow for 50 years and the like. And the little law that I discovered that permitted citizens to take a piece of paper, a petition, and force or compel referenda about their own government, its size and its nature and its purpose. I think that it made local governments stand up a little straighter, work a little harder, save a little more, and do what every family and every business and every individual has done here in Western New York as we lost all that population, and that is adapt, innovate, downsize. And so we take a measure of pride in that as well. This is food access injustice and the like. I think it's, ironically, an easier solved problem. Again, because as I've learned, and I think people who will pay attention and attend this conference will also learn, is that the missing ingredient here is access to resources and capital that most other people have. And it's time now to have that equal access in East Buffalo.
So you're saying the will is there and the resources are there. They just need to be in the same room.
Yes, sir. I believe that.
All right. Tell me about the conference. Is it open to the public? Could John and Joe and Jane from the community just pop on by and hear these speakers? Or is the purpose really here to be an open discussion from which can develop the action plan?
Well, our purpose, I was discussing this the other day with Mark Blue, head of the NAACP, who's a collaborator, and Thomas Buford at the Buffalo Urban League. Our principal purpose, again, is to get the Black East Side Buffalo leaders and citizens who are doing this work in the room to develop these relationships. But I do believe, of course, that everything must be transparent and the like. So between now and October 12th, we're going to work on that. I have a couple of ideas. If you recall, in one of my projects, the Buffalo Conversation, I was very fortunate enough to get some local broadcast journalism outlets, the affiliates of NBC and ABC, to broadcast those live. From I think we did one at Kessler Center at Canisius and the like, one at Buffalo State. So one way or another, I will find a way for everyone to have access to this great exchange of ideas that's going to take place at this conference.
All right. In a general sense, and I'm sure cancer nurses say they do what they do despite the fact they see death. Certainly Alex Wright and Allison Mahoney do what they do because they see the value in what they do. In a general sense, are you optimistic? Why do you keep doing this, Kevin? Is it something where you see the potential for real, tangible progress?
David, that's a great question and an interesting one. And sometimes over the course of these past 30 years,
you ask yourself the same thing, right? Sure.
I've been privileged to do this work. In my judgment, and I've given it some thought over the years. I'm not that great at self-analysis, but in my judgment, it has always seemed to me that the question is not why I do it, but why other people don't. I was raised at a time when civic obligation and commitment to community, and I was, my brothers and sisters and I, like all folks, our parents were remarkable parents, and they believed deeply that as an American, and more important as a Buffalonian, not only to your country but to your community, that you had an obligation to be engaged and to at least attempt to make a modest contribution in exchange, as my mother used to say, for a little bit of grace, and that very much registered with me, and there's no other time. For instance, these past 3 months since May 14th, as I've traveled the country, had these discussions, met these magnificent people, read these books. By the way, we have a wonderful man, Ken Kolb, who just wrote this recent book called Retail Inequity: Reframing the Food Desert Debate. He's going to be there. He's fascinating. Can you imagine the education I've had? It's a way of feeling both alive and worthwhile, and I suppose that's why.
That's enough. Okay, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much, Kevin Gaughan. And as we get closer to this conference, we will talk a little bit about how people can become more involved in it. Kevin, thanks for being with us. That will do it for this edition of Buffalo What's Next. It's our daily discussion on race and education and related issues after the top shooting on May 14th. This is WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WUBJ Jamestown, your NPR stations. I'm Dave Debo. Thanks so much for being with us today.